So we've tested plenty of 34-inch 3440 by 1440p ultra-wide monitors here at Kit Guru, but the AOC AG405UXC is actually the first 40-inch ultra-wide monitor I have ever reviewed, and believe me, those extra 6 inches really make a difference.
Utilizing a 90-degree rotated motherboard layout, Ultra F2 carries the torch of Silverstone's stack effect, bottom to top directional airflow design legacy.
Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and yes, today we are checking out AOC's Agon AG405UXC. Alongside its headline 40-inch screen size with that 3440 by 1440p resolution, it's also sporting a flat IPS panel with a claimed 1200:1 contrast ratio, 144Hz refresh rate, a reported 4 millisecond grey-to-grey response time, and it has HDR 400 certification. Today then, we're going to put this monitor through its paces and find out exactly what it can offer at the £530 asking price. Kicking things off then with a look at the design, I think the AG405UXC is about as stealthy as it's possible to be for a monitor of this size. It's almost entirely black with just a small Agon logo printed in red on the bottom bezel. Those top and side bezels are nice and slim too, measuring about 6mm thick, though the chin is thicker at approximately 19mm. We also see the stand uses a V-shaped metal base, and while it is quite wide at 66cm across, I think if you're buying a 40-inch monitor, you will probably have a large enough desk to accommodate. Round the back, things are pretty simple too, with one more piece of branding in red, but almost everything else is made of matte black plastic. I do like the added touch of the integrated headset stand though, so you'll never forget where you left your headphones. Moving back to the stand then, this does offer a good array of ergonomic adjustments. That means we get up to 150mm of height adjust, there's 30 degrees of swivel both left and right, and then we get tilt from 3.5 degrees downwards to 21.5 degrees upwards. That does mean there's no pivot functionality here, which I think is understandable considering the sheer size of this screen, though third-party VESA 100x100 mounts are supported. As for general ports and connectivity then, this is split across two areas. So on the left-hand side of the screen we find the power input as well as a power switch, though all of the video inputs and USB are over on the right-hand side. Here we find two HDMI 2.0, one DisplayPort 1.4, and one USB Type-C that does support DP Alt mode as well as 90 watts of power delivery. There's also an audio jack, USB upstream port, and then 4 USB Type-A downstreams. Back to the front of the display though, and on the bottom chin we also find 6 buttons which can be used to control the monitor's OSD. More convenient though is the included remote control, which I do prefer compared to those fiddly buttons. An OSD joystick would have been even better in my opinion, as obviously you can't lose that, but the remote control is fine. The OSD itself will be very familiar to you if you've seen any of our other AOC Agon reviews, though that's not a bad thing as it is pretty painless to use. I think things are logically laid out and you can get from A to B very easily using the included remote. It's also handy to adjust the brightness of the display or select video inputs direct from the remote itself without needing to dive into the OSD every time. AOC does also offer its G-Menu software, which is a Windows-based app which lets you quickly adjust the monitor settings direct from your PC. Again, this just works well and provides another way to adjust any of the various settings on offer, so there's no complaints from me. That will do it though for our look at the design, and it's time to move on to talk about performance, starting off with our SpiderX testing. The first thing to look at then is going to be gamut performance, and the AG405UXC does well, offering 100% sRGB, 86% Adobe RGB, and 94% DCI-P3 coverage. Those may not be pro-grade numbers, but for a gaming-oriented display, that is a solid showing. Overall brightness is also decent, as we measured a peak of 345 nits and it could drop as low as 68 nits. Neither result is absolutely jaw-dropping, but for a screen of this size and at this price, it's hard to argue too much. Contrast, however, is very impressive for an IPS panel. hitting 1340:1, even exceeding AOC's claimed 1200:1 ratio, which is really good to see. The white point is also where we want it, ranging from 6400K to 6700K, depending on the brightness used. Those impressive results are rounded off by some excellent colour accuracy. We get an average delta E of just 0.79 out of the box, with a maximum figure of 2.55, putting this up there with some of the best screens we've tested. We even improve things slightly by calibration, though this won't be necessary for most gamers. Speaking of gaming, it's time to move on to our response time testing, and unfortunately, this is the weakest area for the AG405UXC. So there's 4 different overdrive modes in the OSD, going from off, weak, medium and strong, but I'm actually going to skip straight ahead to the medium overdrive results, as both off and weak are simply not worth using. Even using the medium setting, we're looking at very poor results here, with an average grey-to-grey time of 14.77 milliseconds. There is no overshoot, but the response times are just very slow. The most aggressive overdrive mode is the strong setting, and even that is pretty weak by modern standards. We see an average grey-to-grey response time of 9.16 milliseconds and some particularly poor fall times, as shown on the left-hand side of the heat map. There's still very little overshoot as well, with just a couple of transitions showing errors greater than 10 RGB values, so I really think AOC could have cranked the overdrive much further than they did to improve response times. I don't think it would have made the AG405UXC a world beater, but the current overdrive settings just don't seem to be well optimized in my view. That's illustrated by these pursuit camera images using the Blurbuster's UFO test. You can see just how much visible trailing there is even using the strong overdrive setting, while there is just a hint of a pale corona due to the small amount of overshoot. The difference really is night and day compared to a much faster screen, such as AOC's own Q24G2A, which I reviewed back in July. Putting those results then in context with a comparison to a couple dozen other monitors we've tested, the AG405UXC is one of the slowest I've ever tested. It's only faster than the Cooler Master GM32FQ, putting it right towards the bottom of the chart. What that means for real world gaming then is unfortunately fairly easy to describe, as you won't get a fast or overall responsive experience from the AG405UXC due to those slow response times. The ghosting is just too noticeable in a lot of instances. I was very aware of it, for instance, while playing Call of Duty, and even something like Forza Horizon 5 just looks a bit too smeary than it should, all as a result of those poor response times. I personally think the appeal of this screen will really come down to the type of game you play, as the overall image does look good thanks to the very solid contrast for an IPS panel and the impressive colour performance. I can imagine someone who mainly plays slower paced games, perhaps real-time strategy or other sim-style titles, getting on pretty well with this screen due to those points, and of course the fact it is pretty large at 40 inches and the ultra-wide aspect ratio. If you mostly play FPS titles or racing games though, in my opinion this is a no-go. There is the benefit of adaptive sync though to help in those instances where frame rate is below 144 FPS, and while not officially G-Sync certified, I did use the AG405UXC without any issues on my RTX 4090. We also need to talk about the actual pixel density of using a screen this large. Naturally, by using the same 3440 by 1440 resolution that we typically see on a 34-inch ultra-wide, but at the larger 40-inch screen size, does mean the overall image is a bit softer. On the screen now, I've put up a comparison of different pixel densities depending on the resolution and screen size, and you can see that the overall sharpness of this monitor is similar to a 24-inch 1080p screen, but a bit below 1440p at 27 inches or a 34-inch ultra-wide. Now, in practice, I didn't find myself noticing this while gaming, and I actually like the extra vertical height you get from the increased screen size, but text definitely looks softer, so it's a trade-off you will have to be willing to make. The same can also be said about the fact that this is a flat ultra-wide as opposed to a curved panel. This is entirely subjective, but I did find myself using this screen and wishing it was curved. The sheer size of it, for instance, actually means the corners are a fair distance from your eyeballs, and I did actually notice some IPS glow in those corners while gaming in a darker environment. On the other hand, you may hate curved screens or particularly need a flat panel for whatever reason, so it is very much personal preference. The viewing angles are solid though. I didn't notice the colours getting washed out or distorted when viewing the screen from the side, so I've got no complaints there. The final point to mention is that although the AG405UXC does support an HDR signal, it's only display HDR 400 certified, which in my opinion is simply not worth using. There's no local dimming and it doesn't get bright enough, so best not to think about this as an HDR monitor. Wrapping up this review then, the AOC Agon AG405UXC has actually been a very interesting one to test, mainly because it's the first 40-inch ultra-wide I have ever reviewed, and in some areas it really excels. Contrast, for instance, hit 1340:1, which is a great result for an IPS panel, while out-of-the-box colour accuracy is hugely impressive and we saw perfect gamma tracking too. I also like the relatively low-key design, while the OSD and included remote control make adjusting settings a breeze. The slow response times, however, are far and away the biggest downside to this monitor. Simply put, the AG405UXC is one of the slowest monitors we've tested over the last year or two, with a best case response time of 9.16 milliseconds using the most aggressive overdrive mode on offer. That means it is hard to really think of this as a 144Hz refresh rate monitor, as so many of the transitions are slower than they need to be to meet the 6.94 millisecond refresh window. Even then, I do still feel that I could recommend this monitor, but only to those who play slower paced games and absolutely want something that's bigger than a standard 34-inch ultra-wide. It's definitely not going to be for those who play fast-paced FPS titles, but if you are happy to make that compromise at £530, I do still think this screen is worth buying due to how good it is in almost every other area. I'm just sat here thinking, if only the response times were just 3 milliseconds faster on average, this would be an absolutely killer monitor, but as it is, it's only going to appeal to a smaller niche than it really deserves. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this review. If you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do ding that notification bell if you haven't already, and hit subscribe so you don't miss when we upload a new video. If you want to carry on the conversation, head down to our description where you'll find a link to our Discord server, and you can even help us out by buying one of our new t-shirts, and even consider backing us on Patreon. That is it for this one though guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.